correct. I don't have to remind many Americans that the Center for Disease Control was the one that said you should use DDT in your homes.
Used right, it is absolutely harmless to humans and animals. Remember the name, DDT. It spells certain death.
A scientific panel today reported that pesticides may indeed represent a grave threat to mankind.
Remember the swine flu scare of 1976? That was the year the U.S. government told us all that swine flu could turn out to be a killer, and Washington decided that every man, woman, and child in the nation should get a shot to prevent a nationwide outbreak, a pandemic. Well, 46 million of us obediently took the shot.
Did anyone ever come to you and say, there's the possibility of neurological damage if you get into a mass immunization program?
No.
No one ever did?
No.
I can't believe that they would say that they did not know that there were neurological illnesses associated with influenza vaccination. That simply is not true. We did know that.
Then he's lying.
I guess you would have to make that assumption.
Then why does this report from your own agency list neurological complications as a possibility? You didn't feel it was necessary to tell the American people that information.
Dr. Sensor's CDC also helped create the advertising to get the public to take the shot.
The vaccines are safe, so roll up your sleeve.
And now Americans are claiming damages from Uncle Sam amounting to $3.5 billion. By far the greatest number of the claims, 2/3 of them, are for neurological damage or even death.
There are serious concerns tonight about how well the CDC controls dangerous germs at its own labs after yet another safety lapse.
For the third time in a month, the CDC acknowledged deadly pathogens were handled incorrectly in government labs.
That CDC is the CDC that allegedly is looking out for your public health. When we start with the assumption that the official dogma has to be the objective standard, then what fact checkers look for is a piece of published media that confirms the statement made by that particular organization. And then debunkers and conspiracy theorist blower-uppers come in and say, we're going to make this thing clearly the scam that it is. Every media outlet that is in the public media right now has planted evidence, and they have re-ranked pages. So if you look today at face mask wearing, and if you look today at social distancing studies, you will see the studies that used to be number 1, number 2, number 3 on the pages of PageRank search don't exist anymore. And what is there are studies that wind up having headlines that support the common narrative.
You're going to be hearing more about advanced guidelines?
Because if you can keep people from assembling, guess what they're not talking about? They're not talking about the issues of the campaign. If you can keep people in their homes, the only source of information that you can have is what you curate for them. Now I know how to target my electorate. They're in the only place I allowed them to be, being fed the only message I'm allowing them to hear, through a media that I control.
Since the invention of the printing press, there's been a battle to control disseminated information. In the early 1900s, oil tycoon John D. Rockefeller took control of every newspaper and news editor of his era. He became America's first billionaire, paving the way for the power-hungry ever since. Thus began the gold rush for the modern world's most precious resource, the narrative.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to a major circulation American journal?
During a Senate committee investigation, it was revealed that the CIA had been conducting a covert operation to infiltrate and control U.S. media. They called it Operation Mockingbird.
We do have people who submit pieces to American journals.
Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks?
This, I think, gets into the kind of details, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to get into in executive session.
Over 3,000 CIA contracted and trained operatives were placed in key positions within top media outlets. Posing as editors and journalists, these well-paid actors never dared to question the effect of their lives on the world beyond their cozy studio.
How often does the CIA manipulate the media in this way?
It goes beyond your wildest imagination. Setting up student organizations so they could draw radical students in. 5,000 university professors co-opted to help the CIA manipulate people's minds. Journalists in the U.S., including big-name journalists, co-opted to function routinely to help the CIA put out stories and biases to the world.
As this 1952 CIA memo says, the aim is controlling an individual to the point where he will do our bidding against his will.
It's a great brainwashing process to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interest of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country.
Would you say that continues today?
Well, yeah, I would think probably for a reporter it would continue today, but because of all of the revelations, I think you've got to be much more careful about it.
So how do we know that Operation Mockingbird still isn't in effect? Well, we don't.
It was the Telecommunications Act of 1996 that opened the door for predatory corporations to monopolize the industries of print and broadcast.
This bill protects consumers against monopolies. It guarantees the diversity of voices.
Today, a handful of corporate empires own and control the vast majority of everything you read, hear, and watch. From the biggest movie studios, television and radio networks, newspapers and magazines, to the vast universe of internet news and entertainment sites.
Amazon has transformed its operations in response to COVID-19 to protect employees and keep packages flowing.
The company is keeping its employees safe and healthy while still delivering those packages to the doorstep. The company is keeping its employees safe and healthy. The company is keeping its employees safe. Millions of Americans staying at home are relying on Amazon.
And that is how it works. It's like a house of mirrors, where you're seeing the same thing over and over and over again, except it's distorted.
There's an industry that is paid to go after and target journalists, whistleblowers, and inundate our consciousness and the images we see to try to ruin, destroy, or smear the idea that they don't like or the person who's delivering it.
You smear somebody with falsehoods and all the rest, and then you merchandise it. And then you write it, and if they see it's reported in the press, so they have that validation that the press reported the smear, and then it's called the wrap-up smear. Now I'm going to merchandise the press's report on the smear that we made. And it's a tactic.
Welcome back, everybody.
News personalities are not the only high-paid actors to serve the propaganda machine. Most late-night talk shows are owned by the same corporate overlords and thus follow the same script, only laced with a laugh.
Our main story tonight concerns conspiracy theories.
Last Week Tonight with John Oliver featured a skit entitled Coronavirus Conspiracy Theories.
Like the claim that the moon landing was faked.
First thing to note here is that Mr. Oliver opens with commentary about conspiracy theories that are completely unrelated to coronavirus. This is a standard tactic used by propagandists to set a tone so that anything that follows will be seen through the lens of absurdity.
Plandemic, a pseudo-documentary filled with a hodgepodge of conspiracy theories.
Mr. Oliver then does his best to debunk Dr. Judy's claim that she was arrested but never charged with a crime.
She was absolutely criminally charged.
This was not an oversight, but a blatant lie. Prior to the taping of this episode, Mr. Oliver had the official arrest documents that clearly prove that Dr. Judy was never charged with a crime. Mr. Oliver then attempts to debunk the idea that a beach, aka nature, holds any value in boosting our body's natural immune system. Instead of challenging the point with science, he kills it with a smear.
Everything that you just said is insane.
Television is not the truth. We deal in illusions, man. None of it is true. But you people sit there day after day, night after night, all ages, colors, creeds. We're all you know. You're beginning to believe the illusions we're spinning here. You're beginning to think that the tube is reality and that your own lives are unreal. This is mass madness, you maniacs. In God's name, you people are the real thing. We are the illusion. So turn off your television sets. Turn them off now. Turn them off right now. Turn them off and leave them off. Turn them off right in the middle of the sentence I'm speaking to you now. Turn them off.
In 1979, the world decided that we needed the Bayh-Dole Act because we needed to reform our patent system. And one of the modifications was we allowed recipients of federal funding to patent and retain economic interest in the research that the public paid for. You get a $5 million grant from the taxpayer, and then you get to charge the taxpayer a premium for the technology they paid to develop.
Pfizer's going to get nearly $2 billion. Moderna receiving $438 million in taxpayer money. And yet both companies have said they will not sell the vaccine at cost. They're going to make a profit on it. Should pharmaceutical companies profit off this vaccine research that taxpayers have helped fund?
The Bayh-Dole Act failed the American people because rather than standing on the shoulders of giants, we now kneel at the feet of greed. My systems flagged anomalies when I started seeing nonprofits and corporates and cover financing for coronavirus programs in the late summer and fall of 2019. Our first red flag came out when we read the World at Risk scenario. Now, there's an organization called the Global Monitoring Preparedness Board. This organization is a part of the World Health Organization, and this board includes Dr. Elias from the Gates Foundation and Anthony Fauci from NIAID. These two individuals, plus the director of the Center for Disease Control in China, come out with a recommendation that says that by September 2020, 2 global pandemic preparedness exercises have to be completed. And one of them has to be done on the release of a respiratory pathogen. That then gave rise to an October event, Event 201.
On behalf of our partners in the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Event 201 took place 5 months before COVID-19 was declared a pandemic. The participants of the event are some of the same people that are now deeply involved in the real pandemic and profiting from it as well. Event 201 was a scripted, multi-camera, live event that was broadcast globally via the internet. An event of this complexity and magnitude would take months to write, prep, and produce, placing the conception date at least 1 year prior to the actual pandemic.
There is no question that there will be a surprise outbreak.
Anthony Fauci knew as early as January of 2017 that we would see an outbreak before the end of 2020. Even Bill Gates, a man with no medical training, knew it was coming.
If we start now, we can be ready for the next epidemic.
Every single thing that you have seen play out in front of your eyes, all of them laid out in their tabletop exercise, which, by the way, fact checkers have said has nothing to do with the coronavirus outbreak. Just happenstance. This is that wonderful universe of improbabilities where events just co-emerge and then nature conveniently backs itself into our architecture. That's the scenario we're supposed to accept. Brilliant.
Some countries have banned travel from the worst affected areas.